Welcome to Man Life Crisis. Today I received a package from Turbine with the latest titles from their Turbine 3D Blu-ray collector series. I know many people are no longer interested in 3D, but I'm a big fan of good 3D films. Of course, there are also plenty of bad ones. That's why I thought we'd take a look together and discuss our thoughts on 3D. And when directly comparing especially Mission Impossible to the 2D version, I noticed a lot of details that were adjusted for the 3D experience. I wasn't aware of this myself, and I'd like to show you right now. A few months ago, Turbine released their first 3 titles on 3D Blu-ray: Jurassic World, Dominion, Minions, and The Bad Guys. And last week, at the end of October 24, the second batch arrived. I don't know the English title of that one. Raus aus dem Teich, Dr. Dolittle, and I'm super excited for, especially Mission Impossible Fallout. This is the first and only Mission Impossible film that was released in 3D in theaters. And unfortunately, back then, I couldn't find a cinema near me that showed the 3D version. So I'm thrilled to finally have it at home and to be able to watch it. Let's talk briefly about 3D in general. 3D isn't an invention of the 2000 years. 3D films have been around since the 1950s, when directors like Alfred Hitchcock were pioneers with films like Dial M for Murder. Another film you can watch from this era on 3D Blu-ray today is House of Wax from 1954. Highly recommended. It's incredible what amazing 3D effects were possible even back then. Then in 2009, 3D technology made a comeback thanks to digital technology. Up until that time, theaters were still playing films from celluloid, that is 35mm copies. And it's only been 15 years since digital projection came into theaters. 15 years is quite some time now. But I remember that innovation well, and how I experienced it back then. It wasn't really a huge hype among my friends, but I was so excited that finally something new was happening in cinema, and I kept urging everyone I knew when I was still in Munich to come and watch a 3D movie with me. The first 3D film I saw back then was, if I remember correctly, Beowulf 3D in 2007. The film wasn't great, but I remember the title flying through the theater in 3D, and I was like, wow, how do they do that? Nothing much new happened until 2009, but then things really kicked off. My Bloody Valentine 3D, Up, Final Destination 4, and many other animated films, and then, of course, Avatar. Looking back, I must say that was an amazing start for 3D. Those movies were technically very good because there had been no conversions up to that point. They were all real films shot in real 3D with 2 cameras. But then greed kicked in and producers ruined the 3D experience. Films were quickly converted from 2D to 3D. And those early conversions were really, really poor. Barely any depth. The movie makers weren't really making those movies for 3D, so the editing was off. The films were not staged for 3D, if you know what I mean. Still, you had to pay an extra fee until today. And so it went on, one bad 3D conversion after the other, and with fewer and fewer true 3D films. So where are we now today, 15 years later? Nowadays, 3D is almost dead. Hardly any big blockbuster gets a 3D release in theaters anymore. Even, Dune Part 2 skipped a conversion, even so I really, really liked the first part in 3D. And yet, conversions have become really good. One of my favorite 3D films ever is Jurassic Park, the original, in 3D. An amazing experience, highly recommended. Let me know if you want to know more about 3D classics in detail, and I'd love to cover that in another video. So Mission Impossible Fallout is also a very good 3D conversion. The action scenes and large set pieces all benefit from the 3D. There aren't really any special pop-outs, but those are just gimmicks in any way. The scenes all feel very three-dimensional, and for example, when this wall of water comes up here, it looks really impressive. And of course, the flying scenes with the helicopters at the end are really well done. I synced up the 2D and 3D Blu-ray on my PC and compared a few scenes, and it's super interesting to see how much work goes into a post-conversion. For example, here I noticed in the underwater shots that extra bubbles were added to give the water more depth, which works really well. When Ethan Hunt races through Paris, the buildings and vehicles just fly by. And when the truck tears through a narrow alley, and when the truck crashes, extra smoke was added, so it blows towards the viewer even more in 3D. And I've noticed this quite often. I think fog and fine particles in particular are hard to separate from the background objects. So the option is to add new fog that can be better placed in 3D space. Especially here, when the snow crashes through the window, you can clearly see how much was added. It's really a very detailed conversion. It's just fun to watch. The Blu-ray picture quality is good too. Of course, the colors on the 4K disc look a bit more natural thanks to HDR, and the film grain gives a better picture with more details, but the Blu-ray holds up very well. You can tell the grading was brightened a bit for the 3D disc, probably to help the 3D effect in darker scenes. But there is one big drawback for me. Film grain in 3D. That doesn't work for me. What is film grain? In short, if you shoot on film, on celluloid, the film material has a slight noise called film grain. If you shoot digitally, it doesn't have this. It can be used effectively as a stylistic tool, for instance, to make something feel dirtier or grittier. Sometimes filmmakers nowadays re-add digital film grain in the grading. It gives the picture something alive and cohesive. It just doesn't look so clean. Mission Impossible Fallout was shot on 35mm film and has significant film grain accordingly. This works great on the 4K Blu-ray and is wonderful to look at, but the purpose of 3D is for the viewer to be part of the world and to look into it. And a clean image without film grain is better for that because it more closely resembles our natural vision, unlike constant noise in the 3D view. So that was a little bit a negative for me. Turbine can't do anything about it. It's due to the production circumstances and shows that the 3D version was just an add-on. But the film also has two huge IMAX sequences that were shot digitally, and this shows the difference in the 3D version. The halo jump and at the end the helicopter sequence. The aspect ratio also changes in these scenes to a more screen-filling format. Just that makes a huge difference for 3D at home, and the film grain becomes more subtle and the sharpness increases in those scenes. But the 3D effect itself is insanely good, a lot of depth, you're right in the middle of the action. I didn't notice any disturbing ghosting either. Of course, that depends on your system at home, and it can occur in dark scenes, but very rarely, and the highlights of the movie are all in daylight anyway. As for the audio, there's English and German Dolby Atmos track. On the 4K disc, there's only Dolby Digital 5.1 for the German language. That's definitely a big plus for the 3D disc if you're interested in the German track. And it's the same with the other two discs, Dolby Atmos in both languages. Really, really good.
Mission Impossible.
So, in summary, the Turbine 3D Blu-ray Collector Series delivers great quality for all 3D enthusiasts, and Mission Impossible Fallout is definitely a highlight for me with top-notch 3D and Dolby Atmos sound. The other two offers fun as well, but I still have to watch the whole movies. If you love 3D, you should definitely add those to your editions, and for our friends overseas, they should be region-free if I remember correctly. So just go ahead and buy them. If you want to know more about 3D films, write in the comments, and we always appreciate a subscription and a like. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.